So I would like to invite up now our panelists. From the President and CEO of Rail Europe, we have Björn Bender. How are you? Very elegantly coming up the stairs. Hello.
Hi.
Good to see you. We also have Danielle De Silva. She's the head of sustainability, also from Booking.com. Good to see you, Danielle. You're very welcome. You can take a seat. Kristiina, Hietasaari. She's the senior director of Visit Finland. Thanks for being with us. You can sit there. And representing the European Commission, the director of DG Grow, we can welcome Valentina Superti. Welcome.
Hi.
You can take a seat just here behind me.
Yeah.
And then from Google, to get the industry perspective, we have the Industry Relations Manager, that's Feria, Kazemi. You can sit there. Great to see you. And last but not least, also from the European Commission, but from the cabinet of Frans Timmermans, the EU Climate Chief and Executive Vice President, we have Danielle Mess. So, great to see you all. Are you enjoying the Destination Europe Summit? Yeah?
Very much.
Thank you.
Lots of interesting takeaways so far? Yeah? Okay, well, let's start perhaps with yourself, with Google. Because, of course, Google, you know a lot about us, about our trends, about what we do when we're online, about where we want to travel, why we want to travel, how many we are perhaps in our family or groups. What preferences, traveler preferences, have you noticed and behaviors when it comes to sustainability?
Yeah, so what we're seeing is a little bit of an environmental awakening from travelers. We actually did some research in partnership with Kantar last year, and what we saw is that compared to pre-pandemic times, sustainability has actually increased in importance for about a third of travelers. And our search data actually shows that this sentiment holds true. So globally, what we've seen over the last 12 months compared to the 12 months prior is that searches, web searches for sustainable travel have increased by 36% year over year. And so what we're seeing is that there is this importance for sustainability. And in particular, actually, there was recent research from Euromonitor that shows that travelers are focusing much more on specific features of sustainable travel. And that's what we're really focused for solving for when we look at our travel products across Google. So whether it's eco-certifications on hotel search, whether it's showcasing carbon emissions on flight search, or eco-friendly routes on Google Maps, that's what we want to make sure that we're showing to help enable travelers to make sustainable choices.
Okay, and many people perhaps opting for staycations as well because they're afraid of flying and the impact they're having on that. But we'll come to that a little bit later and now get the perspective from Booking.com, from Danielle, and hear what you've seen about travelers' expectations and behaviors after the pandemic from your perspective.
Absolutely, and first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's really great to be here today with such a diverse perspective on the stage. So we have seen that travelers are increasingly caring about sustainability, about the impact of their trips, environmentally, socially, economically. We do research every year with over 30,000 travelers from all over the world, and we see that steady increase. And so this year, over 3/4 of the travelers we surveyed said that they want to travel more sustainably in the coming 12 months. And we also saw that the pandemic had an impact on that as well, with 61% saying the pandemic makes them want to travel more sustainably. But I think we can also say that intent doesn't necessarily mean action, and there's still a gap there. And it's great to hear the data around the searches, because I think that's a positive sign. But what our travelers are also telling us is that there's two key barriers for them. The first one is around the perception of cost, and you just touched on this in the previous conversation. I'm sure we can dig in more. And the other is around the availability of sustainable options, or rather the lack of availability. On cost, the same proportion of travelers who say that they want to travel more sustainably also tell us that the cost of living crisis and the energy crisis are contributing to their ideas about their spending plans. It's heavily impacting them. And 50% of travelers tell us that sustainable options are too expensive. So you see that dilemma coming in where they want to make a more sustainable choice, but they feel that that is mutually exclusive with actually making something that's okay for spending. And availability is the other barrier for them, in that they feel that there are not enough options available to them. And that's what we see from our accommodations as well. If you look at the supply side, that matches with less than 10,000 properties being third-party certified, that's less than 1% of the accommodations that we have on our platform. So it shows a real gap there that if we want to actually meet that demand for travelers, there's a huge need to support the European accommodation sector and the global accommodation sector to actually increase their sustainability practices.
And just going back to transport, you mentioned the price. I mean, we're here in Brussels. To get to London, you see a lot of people taking the plane because it's just too expensive to take the Eurostar. Same with the Thalys to go from Brussels to Paris. It's so expensive unless you book months in advance. So consumers want to be sustainable, but they can't afford to. Björn Bender, is that something that you're addressing?
Maybe that's one of the extreme examples. Huh? So, of course, there's a high and increasing demand for Eurostar, for instance, but also other point-to-point relations in Europe. But first of all, the most important point for me is that the way how we look on rail travel, what we expect from rail travel, how we interpret rail travel changed completely. Huh? So when I joined the industry, took over my first responsibility in a railway carrier 15 years back, it was quite unsexy to work in the mobility industry for a rail player. And of course, maybe we needed a bit all sustainable and climate discussions to see the advantages specifically for Europe and not for one country as a continent to travel within. And of course, we do have 12% more travelers in Europe in the rail industry in 2022 compared to 2019. So above already compared to pre-COVID, and this is a challenge because we expect very fast solutions from the rail industry how to travel in a sustainable way within Europe. And
would you thank perhaps people like Greta Thunberg, the Swedish climate activist, for making your job a little bit easier?
Yeah, at least partly, I would say, because of course we see increasing awareness how to travel, and we see in the younger generations increasing demand to travel in a different way, of course. On the other side, it's a lot of about reducing complexity. So I was listening to Glenn Vogel, and he was describing how complex airline ticketing or air ticketing is. Compared to the rail industry is very simple. So it's a lot still about educating, about bringing in visibility and transparency into the system, because it's quite complex, even for Europeans traveling within Europe and coming from overseas, and we are doing mainly business overseas, bringing non-Europeans to Europe is even more complex. So yes, she's doing a great job, but it's a lot related to technology. Yeah?
Well, I mentioned her also, Danielle Mess, because Frans Timmermans, the executive vice president, once told me in an interview that it was thanks to her that we have an EU Green Deal and obviously the Friday for Future movements. But just in reality, tourism in Europe is, of course, very dependent on aviation. What are you doing, or how is the EU Green Deal addressing this huge challenge?
Yeah, no, thanks also for that question, because like one thing that we also tend to forget when we talk about the need to have sustainable travel is that we have the basic human need to travel. We have the basic human need, it's our liberty to travel the world, discover new places, discover new people. We all remember, I think, our first trip abroad. I'm a dad of 4. I tend to think I have a busy job. I want to travel, and air travel needs to become more attractive, and I'm a big proponent of that. But the reality is that air travel is also here to stay, to discover other destinations. And then the only answer is to see how can we make that air travel more sustainable and greener, so that people can take a flight without feeling flight shame, but just pride of doing something that it means traveling around in a decent way. And I totally agree with you that when setting overwhelming goals, that should not become an overwhelming experience. And a lot needs to happen to bring all these biokerosene and things like that to make air travel more sustainable. You need a big plan for that, and you even need also a big discussion with regions. My big fear is always that it will be the big airports first who will get the biokerosene, and then the regional airports who need it most, because the trains of Train Europe won't be able to reach the islands, will come last. So that's one of the areas where I would like to use the rest of the remaining political cycle that we have to really offer a regional pact on behalf of my executive vice president, to see how we can bring different players together, industry, government, to make sure that also these regions get sustainable travel so that people can fulfill their basic need to travel around.
Okay, and that leads me nicely on to my question for Valentina. Superti, also, of course, from the European Commission, head of DG Grow. Do you think that Europe is a real leader in sustainable tourism?
Good morning to you. Nice to see you again, and all of you. And thank you for the invitation. Well, first of all, Europe is still the leading touristic destination in the world. So I think the first objective that we have in the European Commission and in the European institutions is to keep that level of performance. But since we are very ambitious, Commissioner Breton said it, we want to be a trendsetter. We have a second objective, which goes further, and which is to become and to make of Europe the more sustainable touristic destination in the world. Needless to say, this is a complex operation. Tourism is, we are trying to have a scientific approach, an holistic approach. We are talking about quite an heterogeneous ecosystem made of different strands, which makes that we are operating at various levels. Let me say shortly, at least 2 levels. First is working hard on decarbonizing, basically making more efficient 2 main pillars, which are transportation on the one hand and accommodation on the other. So that's one strand of work. But then, you know, with a more, let's say, holistic or broad perspective, we are working on tourism as a whole, with member states, with the European Parliament, but also very concretely with the stakeholders on the ground. We are developing projects to go from vision to action, to reality, to try to translate these objectives into reality. And I want to say that sustainability is, of course, environmental sustainability, but it's more than that. It's about developing the touristic industry as being an opportunity for an experience which is also an opportunity to be more inclusive in terms of involving local communities, in terms of developing alternative routes, in terms of putting, you know, emphasis on our common, very rich cultural and historical
Let's just hear
experience.
about that experience on the ground, because we're delighted to be welcomed by a representative here from Visit Finland, Kristiina. So just kind of tell us what that's like in reality, because you are showcasing or leading the way, perhaps, when it comes to being a sustainable destination to visit.
Well, yes, the reality is something very different, I would say. Of course, it's great to see that nowadays all the destinations are actually competing who is the most sustainable destination. We are not competing about the arrivals anymore, which is, of course, very good development. But I do believe that really, if we think about the success of the whole sector, it's really depending on how well we managed to balance the requirements of tourists and local people and also environment. But how to actually implement those objectives is sometimes a bit difficult, because we have heard already today that the majority of our industry stakeholders are SMEs, or in Finland they are mostly micro entrepreneurs, and they simply lack the resources and know-how how to invest in sustainable practices. And for that reason, I think that the NTOs like Visit Finland has a really, really big role in taking the lead and making it as easy as possible for anybody to join the road together for a better future.
Do they feel like they're having an almost existential crisis?
I wouldn't say crisis. Some of them have awakened earlier than others, but I think that the more we get companies on board, the more there will be followers, because they tend to, of course, follow or take the benchmark from those who are leading the way.
And that's something we heard from Glenn Fogel, the CEO of Booking.com as well. He discussed that support for SMEs. Perhaps you can shed a little bit more light on exactly how that program that you have works on the ground in reality.
Absolutely, and I completely agree. We see that SMEs are struggling to find the capabilities, the resources, the knowledge to implement on sustainability, and that's something that needs to be addressed. And when I mentioned earlier that there are less than 1% of the accommodations on our platform with a sustainability certification, there is a need to bridge that gap and to create a pathway. So we did release our Travel Sustainable program a couple years ago, exactly designed to address this challenge and to bring support to those accommodations, primarily SMEs. So it creates a pathway. We provide guidance, expertise, guidance, insights, knowledge to give more confidence to accommodations on what practices they can do on sustainability, so they can understand what sustainability means in their context and for them. And in turn, we recognize them for the actions that they're taking on sustainability. So with that badge, what we do, and Glenn mentioned the leaves, the idea is that we can showcase to consumers higher levels of sustainability so that it's not zero to certification, because that's not attainable at the moment, and that's really difficult for us to achieve overnight. That gap is very large. But what the program does is it allows us to transparently show where an accommodation is today, the steps that they need to achieve to have impact on the industry and actually make a sustainability impact, all the way to certification. And we can create this cycle where we have more options that travelers can review and book with transparent information. We give that feedback back to the accommodations, and we create this cycle where we can actually encourage them to take action based on this growing demand and growing benefit. That's very much the idea behind the program, and what we see with the gap in the knowledge and the expertise and what we need to achieve the green transition.
And just back to Google there for more perspective on, I guess, the role of technology, what it can play here, also bearing in mind that I imagine a lot of these family businesses and SMEs are perhaps in rural parts of the continent where accessibility as well to even internet could also be tricky.
Yeah, I mean, the role of technology, I think there's a big piece here in terms of information and awareness. And I mentioned earlier that when we look at sustainability, a third of travelers have said it's increased in importance since before the pandemic. Then you also have a third that have said it stayed the same for them. And then there's the final group where it's actually decreased in importance for them. And so what you see is there's actually this inconsistency across traveler views on sustainability. Now, that doesn't mean that that's not influencing their behaviors. Over time, what we're actually seeing is it's starting to have an impact on behaviors. And when you look at the younger age groups in particular, those 18 to 24 age groups, it has a significantly a greater impact on their behavior than different age groups. But when you ask them about things like carbon footprint, it's such an abstract concept that even though their attitudes are there and they say that they want it, they're not necessarily translating that into their behaviors. And I think that's where this value action gap comes into play, and this is where technology can actually make a difference in education and awareness, right? We see a lot of fragmentation across the industry in terms of the various certifications available, whether the various criteria is available in terms of being sustainable. And I think it's about coming together as an industry and making that information more accessible and more available across all these digital platforms in order to help kind of move that needle on these behavior changes and close that value action gap.
Mm-hmm.
And Danielle, there as inside a cabinet there trying to write policies, I mean, there is no one size fits all when it comes to a continent like Europe. We're hearing as well different trends, different behaviors, very confused messages there. So not an easy task either that you have to do.
No, indeed. And I would like to zoom in a bit on the angle that we're talking about a lot about small family-owned businesses often that run these accommodations, because I think that's really a crucial point, because our continent, European continent, is the ideal traveling continent, but these smaller businesses face big trends that they probably think like, how do I overcome these big trends? You have indeed the consumers who want to travel more sustainably. You spoke about the youngest age group. I have that too. We took a plane to Miami, and my daughter of 10 said, "Papa, will you plant a tree?" Because we're flying a flight. And then we came into the hotel and said, like, "Oh, don't use the towel. Use the same towel. Don't use another one." So, like, I face that pressure on a daily basis. The expectations of younger generation, that's coming the way of these family-owned businesses. This demand for sustainable travel. And then at the same time, these SMEs, let's not forget it, we understate that, they're still feeling the energy crunch of the energy prices. And at the same time, climate change is affecting tourism areas as no other the nature. And all of that is coming together. And I already said earlier, you must make sure that when an overwhelming trend doesn't become overwhelming, you need to become very practical and pragmatic about how to help these family-owned businesses overcome this. And again, I think that it should not be Europe dictating everything. That often my experience is also with kids, dictating is not always the best answer to cause a bit of change. The regions really remain important. That's also where regions can do local things, and this regional pact that I mentioned should be broader than just aviation. It should also be about like how do we help people to have the accommodations that they need. Before this conference, I saw this very helpful image of what a zero-emission hotel means. And then I thought, like, okay, with the towels and the minibar not always on, that's something that you think, oh, people can handle that. But if as you come to the top of the pyramid, insulating your hotel, that's a big thing. And yeah, you really need, I think, a cooperation with the regions to bring all of that together so that also SMEs can come along. Because I agree with my colleague from the Commission. We have so many things going on in the Green Deal on how to build a sustainable continent. There's so many work streams that are going on mobility, on the energy performance of buildings. We just need to really bring that together, because like that we can indeed also have the ambition to also be the most sustainable travel continent.
Something to add there, Valentina?
Excuse me?
Anything to add there to what you've heard, to complement what you've heard?
Well, you know, our starting point in these discussions is that tourism ecosystem is very important. So we say 10% GDP in Europe, 13 million jobs, direct and indirect, and 99% SMEs. So that it in itself, I think, gives the level of the challenge that we are facing. It's a huge challenge. I always hear all the time, you know, these small, when I meet them, these small businesses saying that's all what you say is very nice, is very, you know, laudable. But we are struggling with our business, and we need just to, you know, to be able to survive and carry on. So that gives you the level of, you know, of the challenge for our work. We are doing our best. We are, for example, by the way, compiling in a as it is possible interactive way, for example, information on available funding, on availabilities in terms of mentoring. It's a lot about awareness raising. That's the first step. And then it's about, you know, indeed support in getting it done. Yeah. A piece of advice we are always giving to these small businesses is please network and come to Brussels, because alone it's challenging.
Is that a reality for them to network and come to Brussels when they're busy running a business at the same time?
Well, it might be a solution for some, but for the majority, I wouldn't say so. I really see that a networking and cooperation within your own region is maybe more feasible. By doing things together, you can avoid overlapping work and also reach synergies within that region. And in the end, it finally probably also ends up with some kind of reducing costs when we do things together. So.
And what kind of advice do you give SMEs that are struggling and trying to reach these demands of being sustainable and answering to the demands as well of consumers?
Well, we of course, like I said, try to do it as easy as possible, and we actually launched our first sustainable development project at Visit Finland already 1993. So it's a long way to go. But of course, during the last 5 years, we have changed a bigger gear into what we are doing, and when we started our Sustainable Travel Finland program. And that's an easy platform for any company, also the micro entrepreneurs to join the journey. And we are offering all the tools and guidelines and platforms and digital platforms for them so that they just follow the path and see that what is the next action that I have to take.
And just another question there on measuring success, because of course in the past it was always about arrival numbers and booked out hotels, but now it's more about sustainability being as well a success factor. How are you, what are the metrics? What's involved in this procedure?
Well, as we all know, there are several global and regional indicator systems available, and well, ETC has helped all the member states by putting up the list of 12 different indicators. And from them, my favorites are the satisfaction of tourists and satisfaction of residents, spend per visitor, and then the impact tourism has on employment. Because the satisfaction is actually the only way that we can measure that how well we are fulfilling the mission of tourism, which is producing experiences. And we can see from many very popular destinations in Europe that obviously it's easy to offer great experiences. But the more crowded those popular places will get, the more there will be travelers who are no longer happy with that experience. And that development is further accelerated by the dissatisfaction of the local people, because if they see that the tourist is harming their everyday life, it's quite obvious that the less hospitable they will be towards the visitors.
Sure, and that's something we're seeing on the ground. Björn Bender, you're nodding, so I'd like to hear from you, but I also want to look around the room because we have about 18 minutes left for this panel. So if you do have questions, please pop them on the Slido. I'm just looking around for my iPad, if somebody could just bring it to me, which went for a little walk there, so I can check out your questions and address them as well to our panelists. But Björn Bender, a reaction perhaps to what you've heard there from Kristiina?
Yeah, so first of all, it's good to hear that travel is back and the demand is back, and now we are talking about how we measure sustainable travel and so on. And I would really underline what you said before in terms of inconsistency. You know? Maybe this is the biggest challenge we see as a mobility or rail industry currently, you know? Because of course the demand is higher compared to pre-COVID. That's good, but people are traveling completely differently. Huh? So because you're not commuting on a day-to-day basis, trains are really made for commuting usually, let's say decades back. You are doing holidays in a different way, so shorter. You want to take your bikes with you and so on. And if you're talking about trains and rail, it's always becomes to a discussion to infrastructure and rolling stock and very, very long cycles. And this brings me back to my first statement when we are talking about expectations. So there is a lot we can do together as, let's say, the travel industry to really increase sustainable travel, supported by different means of transport. This is the important point, maybe, because we are having a very tense, a very emotionalized discussion how we travel, and this needs to be one of our goals, really to de-emotionalize it also on a European level and to get the best out of our system we do have in Europe. And of course, not only on the mobility sector, combined with tourism, combined with all the other possibilities other players are providing, and then it can fit into a more sustainable system. And this is maybe my biggest concern when it comes to our discussion. We have this from different perspectives.
Okay, too much emotion. Quick reaction to that?
No, like I tend to agree that like emotions go abound. Like when people identify flight shame, it's an emotion that they're talking about. And sometimes you also hear national politicians say, well, that means that you just need to travel once per plane. And then I always make the joke, well, I hope it's then a return ticket, because if I am on an island and I can't go back, then I have an issue. We need to make all these forms of transport sustainable, so that the emotion goes away and that people can focus on the positive emotion, which is experiencing new things. I totally agree with you that that is ultimately what we're talking about in tourism, giving a good experience. We just have the task ahead of us to make sure that that is a better experience going into the future.
With the clock, of course, ticking and the context of all these crises, like the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis. We have a couple of questions here on Slido, so thank you so much for them. I'll start reading them out there. There's a question from Tour Spain Austria, from Daria Krak. Do you feel that sustainability measures are slowly implemented since companies are afraid of falling and afraid of being perceived as greenwashing? Perhaps a question for yourself, Danielle?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think there are a variety of ways to measure sustainability, and so you definitely see more scrutiny on targets, and I think that that's something that we're going to continue to experience, and transparency around progress, I think, is key in that case. So when it comes to a fear of setting targets because of scrutiny, I think we just need to remember that as long as you're sharing the progress you're making and the challenges that you're facing, that is the best way forward, because we don't want that to stall any progress. And I also just want to come back to the metric that you mentioned around satisfaction. I think this is so key, because if we're going to focus on the dilemma that travelers are facing on cost versus their sustainable experience, then we need to make sure that they perceive sustainability as a value add, that that's actually bringing the quality of their experience to a new height. And I think that that's something that we should certainly be looking into measure. How is that coming through? How is that sustainability experience really feeding into the value of their trip?
Reaction from you?
Yeah, I think that value add piece is really important there, right? Travelers want sustainability to be easy. They want it to be effortless. So they don't want it to take away from their travel experience. They want to have a balance. And what we've seen is when they're trading off things like costs or schedules, that's where it can have an impact on it. So I think if there's an opportunity to easily communicate the options that are available to them without that trade-off, they will lean into that sustainable choice. And it's on us as an industry to help them make those choices.
Okay, we have a comment now from Sebastian saying, simple observation, booking a multi-stop travel by plane is very easy, but trying the same for a cross-border train can end up in total frustration. Why, Björn Bender?
Thank you for that. No, it's exactly what I was mentioning with complexity. Huh? So we do have in the rail industry very national focuses for centuries. Honestly, yeah? So we are really looking from a France, from a German, from a Spanish, from an Italian perspective on our rail services, and they are not very well connected, specifically in cross-border services. So, and to understand that maybe the booking systems are 10, 15, even 20 years behind the aviation industry when we are talking about rail, this is very important when it comes to train bookings, and having this transparency out of different systems in one interface, and having also the possibility to go for the cheapest one or for the fastest one, that's key. And this is one part what no railway carrier can provide today. Because let's take the example, you're traveling cross-border from Frankfurt to Paris, and you have maybe 5 seats in the same train for the cheapest fare on each carrier. So if you want to have the cheapest one, you need to look at Deutsche Bahn, and you need to look at SNCF. So there is the essential need for having a third party bringing in this transparency. And of course, yes, it's easier today in aviation, yeah, because it's compared to rail, unfortunately, much less complex. So.
Okay, thank you for that. A question for yourself, perhaps. How can we accelerate the net zero transition for hotels from theory to practice?
Sorry?
How can we accelerate the net zero transition for hotels? So from theory, from talking to actual real reality on the ground.
Well, yes, for that we signed last year together with 60 companies from Finland this Glasgow Declaration, because it actually gives us tools how to tackle this CEO emission task, and that of course requires us to do the plan, and by doing it also together with our industry, we thought it would be easier for them to follow our example, that we provide once again the common guidelines and common templates how to do it. Of course, every signatory needs to do their own plans and own actions, but as much as we can support them and help them in that way, I think it accelerates the process, definitely.
Another question here for the Commission. Perhaps Valentina, I'll address it to you. A question about the concrete measures that the European Commission is planning to implement to help SMEs to become more sustainable.
Well, there is some budget. It is useful to remember that with this programming period, we are earmarking more than half of the budget. So this is close to 60% for sustainability and digitalization. And by the way, this is community budget, it's European budget, but it's also valid for the so-called recovery plans. So, I would say that from that angle, there are extremely important opportunities that are available for various measures at various levels, which are available. Then, of course, the challenge, and we come back to what we discussed before, it's also to the awareness, because we are dealing here with small businesses. But here it's where, of course, we are trying to maximize, on the one hand, our outreach possibilities at our level, but that's also why we need to work together, and we are working together with as many stakeholders as possible on the market, including, by the way, crucially, regions. So we are working with a number of regions across Europe. We are working with destinations. We are trying to work with networks. So we are reaching out in order to raise awareness and and translate these possibilities that exist into reality.
Into reality. It's always the challenge, isn't it? Implementation.
Yeah.
You had a comment there? Go ahead.
Yeah, because this is actually the crucial question, right? To at least to us representing the Commission, how can you make this concrete to help this sector on this journey? And I come back to the point that we probably need to become better in the Commission in also bringing a one-stop shop to the tourism sector for all these challenges that they face at the same time. We have to do this big transition that they're facing: accommodation, nature, mobility, everything everywhere all at once is probably not going to help in terms of making people see concretely how to make this decision, but we're not starting from scratch. A lot is happening already. We have indeed a tourism sector that promised at the last climate summit already to go carbon neutral by 2050, setting itself a goal. You have the World Tourism and Travel Council having a very concrete plan how to implement that, and that then needs to be linked, I think, better with what the Commission is doing. And there are two strands here, and I just also spoke very briefly with the cabinet member of Monsieur Breton on that. He's, of course, the tourism commissioner and is doing a lot with the sector. And I just also said to the cabinet member, I will today come also with the offer. There is a lot happening in the European Green Deal under the supervision of my EVP on buildings, on hence also accommodations, on mobility. And hence, I'm coming really, really seriously with the offer today to make sure that we also do our part and complement together with our tourism commissioner in doing exactly that, giving a one-stop shop to the sector that they can set achievable goals on this big journey. Glenn Vogel mentioned Mark Twain as a US author. It's a coincidence because I thought about that same quote. So I will try then with Henry Miller, who said, another American author, travel is not one's destination, it's a different way of seeing things. And we as a Commission also need to learn and see things differently and help really this sector bringing this energy that they have already up so that we can play our part in doing that.
Very briefly, yeah.
Yeah, 1 second. I fully agree with that. But then I would come back to this idea, because we are going a little bit into the sustainability equals greening. It's not only that. When we are pushing for a sustainable tourism ecosystem, it's also about a more inclusive ecosystem, which is most respectful of local communities, where which is more respectful of local traditions, etc., etc. So it's not only, of course, transport and accommodation are key, especially in terms of improving their level of emissions, hence impact on the environment, but it's not the whole story.
It's not the whole story.
I agree with that. Inclusivity is obviously
and that's
essential.
something you mentioned as well earlier.
Yeah.
Just excuse me to those listening for a little bit of a sound effect there in somebody's microphone. I'm not sure whose it is, but just adding a bit of a sound effect there. Björn Bender, and I'd like to hear your take on this idea of this one-stop shop. Like, how should that look? What would be helpful for you, and also for you at Booking.com and perhaps at Google as well?
Yeah, so maybe there are two levels for the mobility industry. So everything what is currently ongoing in the European Green Deal is great, first of all, because we really have the first really the perspective on Europe as a continent for really supporting mobility and sustainable mobility for the future. That's perfect. Second one is maybe more the environment we are working in and the framework, how we exchange data, what are the rules, how we are working together to have a fair competition, also of course with private third parties. And yeah, there we are, of course, looking also to Brussels or to the European Commission, because this needs to be on a European level. I was talking before that it comes from the history, from a very national perspective. But now we do have maybe a once in a lifetime chance really to change that, for mobility, for rail, but it's very much related to travel. And tourism in total. So really looking forward. Many good things in already, and doing this together with the commissions and other authorities will be then the next level we can achieve together.
Okay, similar perspective that Peter de Wilde had this morning there for more coordination, more working together. But of course, EU capitals might have something different to say. Would you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of value that comes out of working together as an industry, and we're doing it already through industry coalitions like Panelists, which both Booking and Google are a part of. And you're seeing some great things come out of it, like the travel impact model that came out recently. And this is us coming together to find a way to collect and showcase carbon emissions data for flights in a unified manner. And you're seeing that this is what Google actually uses on our flight search, and as well as some of the other online platforms that are involved in the Travelist Coalition. And this is only possible by us working together.
Danielle?
Absolutely agree. I think we all recognize that there's a common goal here, whether it's the green transition or sustainability overall in the industry, and there is a need for each of us to play our part. Regulators, policymakers, destinations, but also businesses can play a key role. And there is room for us to complement each other's actions. I think it's evidenced by the engagement we've had with the Travel Sustainable Program, with over 1.5 million properties sharing with us what they're doing on sustainability or what they're not doing, which gives us such a clear insight into what the state of the industry is currently. Also a clear idea of opportunities, but a real clear idea of the challenges. And it allows us to actually build a plan to address those. And so what we want to see is laws designed in a way that allows for that innovation, allows for that collaboration, and a recognition for the ability to complement each other's actions, so that we can really collaborate and work together towards contributing towards the transition that we want to see.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Anything to add?
Well, I of course appreciate a lot of all these efforts that the Commission is offering us as member states for networking and creating policies and regulations, everything. But I would still like to emphasize the EU's role as a financial provider, because we still, I think that one of the biggest challenges for our success is the SMEs' capability to invest in these actions that are really badly needed. And for that reason, I really emphasize the need of the financial support from EU to the SMEs.
So the EU recovery funds, and of course making sure that that funding gets into the pockets of those who need it the most, and it doesn't get stuck in a bit of a traffic jam, bottleneck.
And evenly across the whole continent,
and
not just those countries who normally get the most out of it.
Now, we're nearly running out of time, but we have another question here, again about rail. There's a lot of people very interested in rail. Björn Bender asking about the future position of the night train in Europe. What can you predict if you look through your little glass?
Also a wonderful question. So, of course, we see a renewing demand for night trains, yes, and there are a lot of new connections coming up end of this year and also the following years. We see that private operators are entering the market. That's very good. So beside of the state-owned carriers. And yeah, I see definitely a huge chance for night trains in Europe, specifically when we are talking about, let's say, relations between 800 and up to 1,500 kilometers. And this is above, let's say, the usual distance for a day train. Yeah, and it's wonderful to combine, yeah, with a holiday and also for a business trip. Yeah, what it's needed, of course, are different segments, yeah, different possibilities for different target groups. Because when we are now talking about night trains today, it's very much related to leisure needs, and this will change, and this will also give us a new possibility, yeah, how we travel in Europe.
And
Yeah.
just briefly, how do you visualize, like, what's your dream in your head of 2050 rail in Europe?
Rail in Europe, so it's really, let's say, it needs to be on a tact base, let's say, that it's clear that you can travel from center A to B on a, let's say, hourly possibility. Yeah, what we do have already on a national perspective in part of the countries, but also that we have invested a lot in new infrastructure. We heard this morning when the Portuguese representative was talking, okay, we do not need to talk about night trains, we do not have day trains, because infrastructure is lacking. So coming really to those investments, giving other possibility to have, an offer, an affordable offer, day and night in 20, 25 years, coming back to your question, would be a wonderful, wonderful outlook.
Wonderful outlook, a bit of a utopia, let's hope. Thank you so much to our panelists. Don't go anywhere, because let's just look briefly together at the outcome of the poll to see what our audience thinks the biggest factor to contributing to Europe's position as a leading sustainable tourism destination worldwide could be. If we can just take a look at the results of the poll and bring them up on our screens. We asked you whether it was responsible tourism demand, or whether it was train connections, whether it was green energy, or sustainable certification.
Again, train.
Train, there we go. Yeah, so there you go. What do you think of that, Björn?
Yeah, it shows the need we discussed, and it shows also the possibilities and opportunities we have. So let's take it as a chance.
Let's take it as a chance. Björn Bender, the President and CEO of Rail Europe, thank you so much for being with us. Also, Danielle Mess, Cabinet Member of Frans Timmermans and the European Commission. Danielle De Silva, Head of Sustainability at Booking.com. Thank you so much for being with us. And Kristiina Hietasaari, Senior Director from Visit Finland. Valentina Superti, thank you so much as well to you. And Feria Kazemi from Google. Great to hear your perspectives as well. And thank you so much to you. You've been a fantastic audience. Thank you for being physically here with us. And for those online, thank you as well for joining us. And of course, we have to thank all those who made today a reality, the lead sponsor, Booking.com, and all the associate sponsors, Google, Global Blue, and Rail Europe. And a big thanks to all the teams that did all the work behind the scenes. You cannot see their faces, but some of them are Theodora, Tatiana, and Sabine. A big thank you to them. And the Destination Europe Summit is not over, ladies and gentlemen. It's just getting started for those in the room. There is a networking lunch now, so do make the most of it to reach out, chat, exchange ideas. As you said yourself, Valentina, it's all about networking and exchanging ideas. So that is why we're all here as well today. Thank you so much for your attention, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.